especially where we're thinking about life, liberty, and property, for a right to be unalienable makes it more deeply, more profoundly mine. And that's Locke's sense of unalienable. We see it in the American Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson drew on this idea of Locke. Unalienable rights to life, liberty, and as Jefferson amended Locke, to the pursuit of happiness. Unalienable rights. Rights that are so essentially mine that even I can't trade them away or give them up. So these are the rights we have in the state of nature, before there is any government. In the case of life and liberty, I can't take my own life, I can't sell myself into slavery any more than I can take somebody else's life or take someone else as a slave by force. But how does that work in the case of property? Because it's essential to Locke's case that private property can arise even before there is any government. How can there be a right to private property even before there is any government? Locke's famous answer comes in section 27. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. So he moves, as the libertarians later would move, from the idea that we own ourselves, that we have property in our persons, to the closely connected idea that we own our own labor. And from that to the further claim that whatever we mix our labor with that is unowned becomes our property. Whatever he removes out of the state that nature has provided and left it in, he has mixed his labor with and joined it to something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property. Why? Because the labor is the unquestionable property of the laborer, and therefore no one but the laborer can have a right to what is joined to or mixed with his labor. And then he adds this important provision, at least where there is enough and as good left in common for others. But we not only acquire a property in the fruits of the earth, in the deer that we hunt, in the fish that we catch, but also if we till and plow and enclose the land and grow potatoes, we own not only the potatoes, but the land, the earth. As much land as a man tills, plants, improves, cultivates, and can use, the product of, so much is his property. He, by his labor, encloses it from the commons. So, the idea that rights are unalienable seems to distance Locke from the libertarian. The libertarian wants to say we have an absolute property right in ourselves, and therefore we can do with ourselves whatever we want. Locke is not a sturdy ally for that view. In fact, he says if you take natural rights seriously, you'll be led to the idea that there are certain constraints on what we can do with our natural rights, constraints given either by God or by reason, reflecting on what it means really to be free. And really to be free means recognizing that our rights are unalienable. So here's the difference between Locke and the libertarians. But when it comes to Locke's account of private property, he begins to look again like a pretty good ally. Because his argument for private property begins with the idea that we are the proprietors of our own person, and therefore of our labor, and therefore of the fruits of our labor, including not only the things we gather and hunt in the state of nature, but also we acquire a property right in the land that we enclose and cultivate and improve. There are some examples that can bring out the moral intuition that our labor can take something that is unowned and make it ours. Though sometimes there are disputes about this. There's a debate among rich countries and developing countries about trade-related intellectual property rights. It came to a head recently over drug patent laws. Western countries, and especially the United States, say, we have a big pharmaceutical industry that develops new drugs. We want all countries in the world to agree to respect the patents. Then there came along the AIDS crisis in South Africa. And the American AIDS drugs were hugely expensive, far more than could be afforded by most Africans. So the South African government said, we're going to begin to buy a generic version of the AIDS antiretroviral drug at a tiny fraction of the cost, because we can find an Indian manufacturing company that figures out how the thing is made and produces it. And for a tiny fraction of the cost, we can save lives if we don't respect that patent. And then the American government said, no, here's a company that invested research and created this drug. You can't just start mass producing these drugs without paying a licensing fee. And so there was a dispute. And the pharmaceutical companies sued the South African government to try to prevent their buying the cheap, generic, as they saw it, pirated version of an AIDS drug. And eventually, the pharmaceutical industry gave in and said, all right, you can do that. But this dispute about what the rules of property should be, of intellectual property, of drug patenting,